So another aspect of movement is initiation. Movement's got to start somewhere, even if that somewhere is everywhere. So initiation, this is, look, like I told you, this isn't anything new. Right? I'm sure you've talked about directions and paths and planes before. I'm just trying to be very clear about it. I'm sure you've talked about initiation, right? And by initiation, you know, like the place I first ran into initiation in my life was in dance class, right? So like where the movement comes from is really important. Like the way I thought about it for a long time was the from of the movement, right? Because it's really different like when you're doing a turn in a dance, if you're turning from your pelvis or from your shoulder or from your head, you know, what starts to turn shapes the movement. So that's what we mean by initiation, right? And, you know, this comes into our work. Is there one initiation or many? Right? Can you think of other examples? I'll tell you in a moment. Can you think of other examples that are relevant to how we observe movement, teach movement, work with people's movement that have to do with initiation? You're going to go, oh, geez, I knew that the minute I tell you. Well, like proximal and distal, right? So we could say, does the movement start proximally or distally? Like, you know, a lot of things about, like, we were talking about Pilates this morning. But a lot of things, you know, in Pilates, most of the time you freeze the trunk and you move your limbs around it, just like in dance. That's inefficient movement. We'll get to that, why that is in a few moments, right? But, you know, what we're concerned about in a lot of lessons is how to teach somebody to begin the movement from their center, proximally, and have it travel, be transmitted through the skeleton distally, right? So that's another thing that would be related to where the movement starts. And then how about the idea of preliminary movement or preparatory movement? Right? So in other words, if you ask somebody to stand up, then they have to do something before they stand up. That has to do with the initiation. They're not ready to move, so they have to do something in order to move. That would belong to the category of initiation. Okay, time to put your thinking caps on for real. Can you think of ATM lessons that are organized around the idea of initiation? Pardon? No. Okay, so I have to make the question clear, because in a way you're right. I mean, maybe not all, because we can find exceptions. I mean, Moshe was the guy who, you know, the minute he thought he had a general rule, he'd try to break it, to look for the exceptions, right? Which is part of his genius, I think. But, you know, the thing is, you could say that many lessons, if not most lessons, have the changing of the initiation as an element in the lesson. Right? Like what I talked about the caboose and the engine yesterday, changing what starts and what leads. That's kind of a standard ingredient in most lessons. But that's not what the lesson's about. That's not what holds the lesson together. So here I'm asking you to make a distinction between the ingredient and the moral of the story. Oh God, I can feel the mental pain. So how about this one? You know, you're lying on the floor like this, and you start by lifting your arm. You know, it's you know, pretty soon you learn to lift everything, starting in the center. I'd say that lesson's about initiation. It's about learning to start from the middle, to move everything on the outside. If you don't see that in the lesson, you kind of miss the point of the lesson. Was that a question, Charlie? No. I think in Awareness Through Movement, it's called Fundamental Properties of Movement. Some people call it lie. I call it lie like an X. I don't know what you call it. You know, I mean, that's the problem. We don't have a naming committee. Yeah. Nor do we have any way of punishing people for using the wrong name. Now, personally, the first name I get rid of is Dead Bird. I had a training where...
a substitute for that yet?
Yeah. Twist, seated twist.
Yeah, or Russell Dowman calls it wisteria.
Oh, that's pretty. That's pretty.
Yeah.
No, I mean, really, I love wisteria. That's really nice.
So the sailor.
The sailor.
One? Yeah.
Oh, that's kind of cool. I like that.
The sailor, if you're looking at.
Yeah.
Sailor lesson.
Kind of evocative. But look, you know what? It's really not a question of titles. But it is a question. I mean, I'm being serious now. That, it's really hard to find lessons if we don't have the same names for them.
Yes.
Right? And we have very idiosyncratic ways of doing this. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, like within the context of someone's learning or one training. But once we become a really big community, and the larger that community gets, and the more lessons we have to organize. Like I don't know from all of the AY lessons. It's just not the way it works. I mean, I know some of them. Like I can tell you what 216 is. I can tell you what 60 is, or the ones I've taught, 288, whatever. I know them. But it's like I think I told you the story. Like when I was, maybe I didn't tell you the story. It was the other workshop last weekend. Sorry, I'm confusing you. But when I started working with the bus drivers, did I talk about this? No. Yeah. Well, when I started working with the bus drivers, it took me a long time to get this gig. One of my housemates was a bus driver. And I would get up at the crack of dark. This is when I was at the university in California. Get up at the crack of dark to do my work study job, which was baking, making soups and sandwiches for the coffee shop. And then I'd open the coffee shop at 7:15, but I'd already been there for a few hours, right? But I would get up really early, and I'd be sitting behind the bus driver going, "This is an accident waiting to happen." Because I'm in the middle of the training and watching the bus driver. And I kept thinking about this, and I would go home and talk to Craig and go, do they train you? What do they do about this? And so I was on a mission to teach, to work with the bus drivers. And I mean, I wrote letters and I called I live in a fairly small town. So after a while, I just complained to a friend of mine that I wasn't getting anywhere with this project, who was the mayor that year. So I got somewhere. He said, I know who to call. Use my name. And that was really cool because I went in there and I had evidence and a whole program design and letters and articles. And I was like ready to make my case. And the woman who was this assistant director of the bus district, the transit district, said, "Oh, that sounds really good." I was like, it's like when somebody agrees with you in an argument, you're like pissed because you want to have the argument. I was like, But anyways, I am. Maybe this comes from my performing days. I hate to go somewhere and work and not know where I'm working. In my performing days, I was a magician. There was nothing worse than showing up and having mirrors behind you. It's like, no, I don't really think I want that to happen, right? Or whatever it was, So I went to see the venue, which is actually where they do the bus driver training program. It's in the transit district building. And it was a room that was a little smaller than this room, with a linoleum floor. Unlike this floor, it hadn't been cleaned since they put it in 1952. It was really gross. It was also really small. There were 18 people in the class. The room was maybe half or two-thirds the size. There was no way. So I actually remember David Burson was in Santa Cruz visiting his daughter was at college there. Anyways, we went for a walk on the beach by my house. I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I have to do sitting lessons. I don't know any damn sitting lessons. He goes, yes, you do. And so we, started talking about lessons. And I'm like, oh yeah, oh. And so it was good. He kind of got me through the hump. And I had to redesign the whole program so that we could do it sitting. Anyway. So initiation. Right? So these are both elements in lessons and organizing ideas. All right? And what we're after is the organizing ideas.